You don't like the way we pay our fighters? Too fucking bad. Go start another MMA organization and you go fucking figure out how to do it. And you can pay them $10 million a fight, $30 million a fight, whatever you want to do.
After Dana White's fiery remarks about UFC fighters, the light heavyweight division quickly made their move. Furious and fed up, these fighters united with a massive announcement, one that could truly shake the UFC to its core. They're jumping ship, but if you think that's shocking, just wait until you hear what they're planning to do next. This is the breaking point. Fighters across multiple divisions are standing up, speaking out, making one thing crystal clear. If the UFC won't pay them what they're worth, they'll find someone who will. Cracks in the system have been visible for years, but recently, those cracks have become chasms. The most shocking revelation came from an unlikely source, Jon Jones himself. He spoke about the dire financial situations many UFC fighters face. Picture this: professional athletes at the highest level of their sport, competing in front of millions, yet living in their gym because they can't afford an apartment. Jones didn't mince words when he painted this grim reality.
Most of the guys who are doing the absolute worst are not in a position that they could say publicly, I have a second job, I'm borrowing money from my parents.
Right.
I know so many fighters that are living in the Jackson's MMA gym because they can't afford to have their own apartment. And they're UFC fighters.
So let that sink in for a moment. These are UFC fighters, athletes, who've reached the pinnacle of mixed martial arts. Yet they're borrowing money from their parents and literally living in gyms. That's a reality that would be shocking in any professional sport. But in an organization generating approximately $1.4 billion in revenue in 2020, Jones went even further, touching on something much deeper. The idea that some injustices are truly worth sacrificing everything for.
And if I have to have a bad relationship with Dana, sit out for 2 years, 3 years, to bring light to what's happening.
Let's not sit out for 2 years to bring
light to what's happening, then these are the things that people remember you for more than winning belts. The guy stood for the younger fighters.
This isn't just talk. It's a philosophy spreading like wildfire through the entire UFC roster. Fighters are truly beginning to realize their legacy might not be defined by championship gold, but by whether they stood up for change when it mattered most. The most powerful statement any fighter can make isn't delivered in a press conference. It's made with their feet, by walking right out the door. And honestly, nobody's exit sent shockwaves through the MMA world, quite like Francis Ngannou's departure. The former heavyweight champion, known for his devastating knockout power and his inspiring rags-to-riches story from Cameroon, didn't just leave, he completely torched the bridge on his way out. Dana White, for his part, claimed he offered Ngannou a deal that would have made him the highest-paid heavyweight in UFC history, more than Brock Lesnar, more than anyone else.
We offered Francis a deal that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in the history of the company. More than Lesnar, more than anybody.
But here's where the narrative really gets interesting. White's explanation for Ngannou's departure actually revealed more about the UFC's core philosophy than perhaps he ever intended.
I think Francis is in a place right now where he doesn't want to take a lot of risk. Feels like he's in a good position where he could fight lesser opponents and make more money. So we're gonna let him do.
Honestly, that dismissive tone truly speaks volumes. But Ngannou had his own very clear perspective on why he walked away. And let me tell you, it wasn't about taking easy fights. It was about respect, about being truly valued, and about a pay structure that simply didn't make sense. Listen to his frustration.
When you're talking about pay-per-view, then you're negotiating pay-per-view, and then you see number like 1.25 pay buys and stuff like that, and the pay-per-view is going from $60 to $80 in the past 5 years, and you realize that the 0.25 that is on top of it is out of the $20 that's been added on. I'm like, come on, man. It's not my first pay-per-view contract.
And get this, the mathematical breakdown is absolutely damning. Pay-per-view prices soar by $20, yet the fighter's cut increases by a measly quarter of that. Honestly, it's the kind of negotiation that leaves you feeling completely insulted rather than truly valued. Ngannou continued.
It wasn't even about the money, even how he was structured, even how he was. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. You know, I went home and I was so, I don't know, frustrated or
And here's the kicker. Ngannou's gamble paid off spectacularly. His move to the PFL and subsequent high-profile boxing matches against legends like Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua proved his point in the most definitive way possible. He earned more in a single night than in his entire UFC tenure. Suddenly, getting your money elsewhere wasn't just a threat, it was a proven blueprint. Ngannou's departure was the beginning. Across the UFC roster, fighters are now finding their voices, and they are not holding back. Justin Gaethje, the fan-favorite lightweight known for his all-out brawls, openly expressed frustration in mid-2025, feeling underappreciated by the UFC. After delivering highlight reel performances and taking massive damage, he stated he was done doing cheap-ass steak for the promotion without proper recognition or compensation that matched his risks. Gaethje's complaints weren't just about paychecks, they touched on something deeper, more personal. It's about the emotional drain of pouring everything into fights, sacrificing your health and your future, only to feel sidelined when it comes to real opportunities and rewards. His narrative is one of burnout, where a fighter who's headlined major events and taken massive damage questions why the UFC doesn't reciprocate. Then there's Askar Askarov, a talented flyweight who left the UFC in 2025 after the promotion refused to improve his contract, despite a strong record with only one loss to a dominant champion. Askarov chose to return to his home country for better-paying opportunities, framing it as a no-brainer decision. His exit highlighted how the UFC's rigid stance on negotiations can push skilled athletes away, especially those from international backgrounds facing additional hurdles, like visas and taxes. Even more telling is the story of Tyler Diamond, a former PFL and Ultimate Fighter contestant. Perhaps most heartbreaking, though, is Alex Pereira's situation. The light heavyweight kingpin with a meteoric rise from kickboxing to UFC stardom shared a disheartening message in 2025, after hearing something likely related to pay or treatment that amplified his existing thoughts of retirement. Pereira, who's never been one to badmouth the UFC publicly, admitted the news left him questioning his future in the sport. When even champions at the pinnacle feel this way, you know something is fundamentally broken. But to truly understand why these fighters are reaching their breaking points, we need to examine the system that created this crisis. The system that frankly breaks fighters. So to understand why fighters are fleeing, we need to examine the financial reality they face. The UFC operates under a compensation framework that's fundamentally different from traditional sports leagues, and let me tell you, not in a good way. Unlike the NFL or NBA, where athletes are employees with collective bargaining agreements ensuring around 50% revenue sharing, UFC fighters are classified as independent contractors. This seemingly technical distinction has massive implications. The UFC's revenue share for fighters hovers between 16% and 20% of the organization's total earnings. Let me put that in perspective for you. In 2024, the UFC generated approximately $1.4 billion in revenue, with fighters receiving an estimated $225 million to $260 million collectively, translating to about 16 to 18% of the pie. Now you might be thinking, that's still a lot of money. But here's the thing. When you divide that amongst 600-plus fighters on the roster, the reality becomes incredibly stark. For entry-level fighters in 2025, contracts started around $14,000 to show and $14,000 to win, up from previous minimums of. That means if you lose, you walk away with just $14,000 before taxes, management fees typically 10 to 20%, training costs, and other expenses. Let's do some quick math. After a 20% management cut, you're down to factor in training camp costs for coaches, sparring partners, nutritionists, and medical care, easily another $5,000 to $10,000. Suddenly, that professional athlete paycheck looks more like poverty wage. Shockingly, 43% of UFC fighters earn less than $45,000 annually before expenses, with a median salary of $50,000, which is barely above living wages in high-cost areas like Las Vegas or California, where many train. Dana White, the UFC's president, has his own distinct philosophy about fighter pay, and he's not shy about defending it. His arguments reveal a particular worldview about how combat sports should operate. So listen to his reasoning.
With boxing too, that all guys are overpaid. And every time they put on a fight, it's a going out of business sale.
You know what I mean? We're just trying to get as much money as we can from you guys, and then we're out of here.
We'll see you in 3 years. You can't build a league like that. You can't build a sport. You can't have 750 fighters under contract, making money, feeding their families every year with that kind of mentality. It doesn't work.
So White positions the UFC as this responsible steward of MMA, aiming to build something sustainable rather than burning bright and fast, like boxing. But here's the irony. He's criticizing boxing's model, while UFC fighters are increasingly icing boxing as their direct escape route to better pay. When asked about the pay scale, White then explained,
So what we did is we built a business model where they share. If you're the champion, you share in the pay-per-view revenue. If you're the guy headlining the card, or there's been some special occasions where we know you're bringing in the money too, that you're a big draw. So you two get to share in the pay-per-view revenue.
But here's the massive problem with that model. It creates a truly massive wealth gap between the top 1% of fighters and literally everyone else. Even for those top fighters, the UFC's shift away from traditional PPV models is a concern. With their 2025 announcement of a 7-year, $7.7 billion media rights deal with Paramount, it effectively ends the ESPN FUS PPV structure, replacing it with streaming-inclusive broadcasting. While this could boost overall revenues to over $1.1 billion annually, it might also significantly reduce individual fighter leverage for PPV bonuses. White's most revealing moment actually came after fighters convinced him to raise performance bonuses, only for the very next event to feature 7 straight decisions. His reaction was visceral and completely unfiltered.
The fighters managed to get you to up the bonuses. Do you think there's an argument that maybe you should just up them to...
I think tonight showed that we should not. No. Upping them doesn't change anything. It doesn't make anybody fight any harder. It doesn't change anything. I'm not doing this again.
His commitment to that stance was absolutely unwavering.
Ever.
Today was the last day that I'm doing that. Yeah. Not saying that in the future the bonuses couldn't get up, but I'm not going to be at a press conference and say 200, 300, fucking never again.
And when confronted about the broader criticism of fighter pay, White's response is essentially take it or leave it.
Every time somebody comes out and says, oh, you don't pay your fighters, you don't pay your fighters, I could come out and do this I'm not. I don't give a shit. You don't like the way we pay our fighters? Too fucking bad. Go start another MMA organization and you go fucking figure out how to do it.
But perhaps the most damning critique of the UFC's system comes from those who've lived it. Francis Ngannou didn't just leave, you see. He pulled back the curtain on how the negotiation process really works, or more accurately, how it doesn't work. In a truly revealing conversation, Ngannou explained the illusion of negotiation that fighters constantly face.
I think the way that the business is set up, like they pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating, because either way, you're still in the contract.
And this is where the independent contractor classification becomes less about freedom and more like a cage. Ngannou broke down this cycle.
Let's say 40 months contract. By 20 months, they will come to negotiate. A little bit more money. If you say yes, yeah, then they are giving you a new 40 months, which means they start over because of the money that they added. But because by that time, your value is like maybe 2 or 3 times what they are offering.
And here's where it gets truly exploitative. Imagine this, you're a fighter, struggling to make ends meet, you're about to get $50,000 for your next fight, money you desperately need. Then the UFC offers you a new contract with $100,000 per fight. But here's the catch. It completely resets your entire deal. Ngannou described this trap.
I mean, you're kind of like broke, you're struggling, and then you're seeing your next fight, okay, 50,000, you have to pay this and pay that and get away with maybe 20,000, and you have to pay your loan and all the stuff, and they have a new contract, 100,000. It's really hard to turn that down when you're in that position.
The system intentionally keeps fighters in financial precarity, so they literally can't afford to negotiate. So why don't fighters just strike? Why don't they band together and refuse to fight until things actually change? The answer reveals yet another layer of the UFC's control. When this was suggested to Ngannou, his response was incredibly illuminating.
Okay, so this is the thing. Because you were struggling, you were expecting your fight for the $50,000, which is what a lot of people in the UFC they do, and even for less than that, and they have even borrow money for finance their training camp or whatever. So they are expecting that money to pay back. And if you tell this guy to go on strike, why he has a $50,000 coming up who can like save him from the guillotine, like release his neck a little bit.
The UFC doesn't just control the present, you see, it controls fighters' immediate futures. Miss a fight, and you don't just lose that payday, you might lose your spot on the roster entirely.
Not because the UFC has the power to cut you. I'm going on strike. Oh, really? You're doing that?
You're out at the right moment. No, you're doing that, you're out now.
Then you don't even have that 50,000 anymore. What next?
Ngannou painted the bleak reality.
So a lot of fighters, they don't want to compromise that because that's only what they get. You know, they don't have a saving. They live day by day, fight by fight. And that's why, like, when they don't fight, they go dry.
Unionization efforts, frustratingly, have repeatedly failed, with attempts like Project Spearhead fizzling out primarily due to fear of retaliation. Fighters like Leslie Smith have been vocal pioneers, pushing for change only to face dire consequences, even being cut from the roster amid organizing talks. With the doors to change seemingly locked from within the UFC, fighters are increasingly looking outside its walls, and what they're finding is truly changing everything, especially where the real money is. If fighters can't change the UFC from within, they're discovering they can change their situation by simply leaving. And increasingly, they're finding that life outside the UFC can be far more lucrative and less constraining. The Professional Fighters League, PFL, for instance, has cleverly positioned itself as a fighter-friendly alternative. With its season-long tournament format, it promises clear paths to big payouts, structured million-dollar prizes for winners, which creates much-needed predictability in a sport notorious for uncertainty. Rory MacDonald, a former UFC welterweight contender, moved to PFL after feeling undervalued in the UFC. MacDonald spoke of the refreshment in a system where performance directly ties to rewards, without the politics of matchmaking. While the UFC certainly boasts larger audiences, PFL provides a merit-based ladder that simply feels more equitable, drawing in fighters who prioritize structure over pure stardom. One Championship, with its Asian roots and emphasis on martial arts values, offers another compelling alternative. Here, fighters often praise the promotion's focus on athlete welfare, including better sponsorship freedoms and a family-like atmosphere. Eddie Alvarez moved to One after his UFC stint, noting the huge difference in contract flexibility. One allows pursuits in other disciplines without as many restrictions, fostering a real sense of empowerment. But, arguably, the most lucrative escape route, boxing. Francis Ngannou's journey into boxing after leaving the UFC proved this point definitive. He inked deals for massive boxing paydays against icons like Tyson Fury, proving that the sweet science can offer life-altering sums without the same contractual shackles. Ngannou's success has truly inspired others. Tom Aspinall's family has even hinted at similar paths, where a single high-profile boxing bout could eclipse years of UFC earnings. Now, to truly understand what fighters are fighting for, you need to see the numbers that the UFC absolutely does not want you to focus on. When Francis Ngannou sat down for an interview, the business breakdown of the UFC's profitability became impossible to ignore. The host actually referenced financial data showing just how profitable the UFC really.
I don't know. I mean, if you got 48% as the EBITDA, give or take, their margins are 35 to 50%. You got the margins to be able to afford to.
If they get what? The margin of
The
what?
margins are EBITDA. Their EBITDA margins are very high. They make They make a lot of profit. Very profitable. UFC.
You say how much?
48% is the number we saw when we looked at our reports.
48%?
48%.
But Ngannou had an even more striking statistic to share.
The margin, pay the statistic that's going on now, like they make between 80 to 85%.
The implication here is absolutely staggering, with revenues approaching $1.5 billion annually, and potentially exceeding that with the new Paramount deal. The UFC's profitability margin clearly suggests there's enormous room to significantly increase fighter compensation. The host's conclusion was straightforward.
So let's just say you do $1, they're keeping 48 cents.
Those are the margins. But getting that money to fighters isn't as simple as asking nicely. Ngannou explained the fundamental problem.
I think the way that the business is set up, like they pay They pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating.
So, in 2025, something truly unprecedented happened in UFC history. A massive $37.5 million antitrust lawsuit settlement was approved, finally compensating fighters for alleged wage suppression. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a legal acknowledgement that something had been fundamentally wrong with how the UFC treated its fighters. The lawsuit itself traced back to 2014, when former fighters like Kung Lei and Nate Quarry filed suit, accusing the UFC of antitrust violations through practices like acquiring rival promotions and enforcing exclusive deals that prevented athletes from seeking better opportunities elsewhere. Over the years, this evolved into a class action effort representing over 1,000 fighters who competed in UFC events during that period. When the settlement was finalized in February 2025, fighters began receiving their payments. For veterans like Eddie Alvarez, the announcement brought mixed emotions. He publicly saluted the attorneys and fighters for their decade-long effort, but lamented that the amount fell short of what he believed was truly deserved. Get this. 35 fighters received more than $1 million, and about 100 got over $500,000, with these payouts described as life-changing by attorneys. The settlement also introduced some operational changes. For the next 5 years, the UFC agreed to limit exclusive negotiating periods to 30 days, and matching rights to 4 months, which theoretically gives fighters slightly more leverage when contracts expire. Yet, the broader impact on the sport's structure remained frustratingly limited. No mandatory revenue sharing increases, no union formation, and no dismantling of the independent contractor model. So, where does this truly leave it?
Francis, are you getting more money from sponsorships than fights right now? Okay. Is it 4, 5, 10 times more? Is it 10 times more? Not.
But the potential was certainly there. The possibility of building real wealth outside the UFC's ecosystem. The conversation continued, and this represents a fundamental shift in how fighters think about their careers. While the UFC platform can enable fighters to build personal brands, increasingly they're realizing that platform has value far beyond what the UFC pays them directly. The 2025 announcement of the $7.7 billion Paramount media rights deal represents a critical juncture. Dana White promised that fighters would benefit from this windfall, claiming, "We don't hoard that money." But let's be honest, history suggests skepticism is absolutely warranted here. Analysts predict that while base pays may rise by about $60 million in renegotiated guarantees for top fighters, the overall fighter revenue share could actually dip to just 15%, which is a mere 33% nominal increase in total pay. The harsh reality is that without structural changes, without a union, without mandatory revenue splits, without employee classification, the fundamental imbalance will persist. But what is changing is fighters' willingness to accept that imbalance. Recent endorsements, like the SEIU labor union supporting the Ali Act expansion to MMA, offer glimmers of hope, aiming to curb the UFC's monopsony power that so effectively suppresses negotiations. Additional pressures are mounting as well. College NAL name, image, likeness deals, offering $100,000 to $400,000 for top wrestlers, are diverting talent from MMA pipelines, putting pressure on the UFC to adapt or risk losing the next generation of talent. Comparisons with other sports become truly stark when you consider them. In boxing, fighters often retain 60% to 80% of event revenues. The NFL splits nearly 50% with players including vital benefits like health insurance and pensions, which are completely absent in the UFC, where fighters cover their own medical costs. A hypothetical unionized UFC with 50% sharing could yield an average annual pay of $700,000 for non-champions, tiered from $450,000 for newcomers to $1.2 million for contenders. But perhaps the most powerful tool fighters have isn't strikes or lawsuits, it's their feet. Every Francis Ngannou who walks away and succeeds elsewhere sends a powerful message. Every Justin Gaethje who speaks out and emboldens others. Every Tom Aspinall whose family hints at boxing opportunities reminds the UFC that their monopoly on talent isn't guaranteed. This announcement, "We'll get our money elsewhere," isn't coming from a single division or a unified strike. It's coming from individual fighters, one decision at a time, slowly building into a movement. It's John Jones talking about standing up for younger fighters as his legacy. It's Francis Ngannou proving you can make more money outside than inside. It's Justin Gaethje saying he's done sacrificing without reciprocation. It's Alex Pereira questioning his future after disheartening news. The UFC built an empire on the backs of fighters who had nowhere else to go. But the world is changing, and alternatives are rapidly emerging. Boxing beckons with massive purses. The PFL offers clear tournament structures and clearer paths to earning. One championship provides flexibility and respect, and fighters are learning to leverage their platforms for sponsorships that dwarf their fight purses. The 2025 antitrust settlement provided retroactive justice, but it doesn't guarantee future equity. That will only come when enough fighters realize their collective power, or when enough of them simply walk away toward better opportunities. The UFC's $11.3 billion valuation is built on fighter talent. Without fighters willing to step into that octagon, that value evaporates. Because one thing is becoming crystal clear, fighters are done waiting for the UFC to value them. If the UFC won't pay, they will get their money elsewhere. And they're proving every single day that elsewhere is willing to pay.